The RadioShack Corporation began its journey back in 1921, founded by two siblings in Boston. True to its title, the business specialized in radio gear. While the brand name remains recognizable today, its original format featured two separate words. Nowadays, it's officially presented as a single word, though many places still display it with spacing. Search for it online, and you'll notice their web presence shows the two-word version. Their logo transformation in 1995 merged the words into one, leading to this minor corporate name adjustment. The company's roots trace back to the early 20s, and for the following 4 decades, operations ran smoothly. The business grew and established several substantial retail spaces, but the early 60s brought financial challenges. Radio equipment was moving off shelves steadily, but expenses exceeded revenue, creating an unsustainable business model. Enter Charles Tandy, oddly enough a leather business proprietor, who acquired RadioShack and implemented strategic reforms. The most significant shift involved downsizing to smaller retail footprints. The logic was straightforward: identify top-selling items and focus exclusively on those. Underperforming merchandise simply occupied valuable space without generating adequate returns. This approach proved successful. Combined with additional reforms, these changes rescued the operation and restored its competitive standing. The 70s brought another stroke of fortune when CB radios became wildly popular, naturally benefiting RadioShack. Charles Tandy died in 1978, but his company maintained ownership of RadioShack through the Tandy Corporation. During the 90s, leadership decided to pivot slightly away from radio components and electronic parts toward mainstream consumer electronics. They invested heavily in mobile phone retail. Around the turn of the millennium, RadioShack entered another downturn, one from which they never truly bounced back. This decline continues to this day, which remains astounding. They've been deteriorating steadily for over 15 years, yet somehow remain operational. Quick favor: if you found this video interesting, subscribing helps us cover more rise and fall stories like this. Kindly do please. The slow death. Have you ever been in a Monopoly game where defeat is obvious, but you refuse to surrender? Your opponent has hotels covering the board while you're clinging to a handful of houses, and those two inexpensive purple properties. You keep hitting unfortunate spaces, mortgaging assets to cover debts. Perhaps a lucky card or passing go with that $200 payout keeps you afloat a bit longer. You make desperate trades to settle obligations. Suddenly 30 minutes have passed, and you've been making minimal moves just to survive. You haven't executed any strategy that might actually lead to victory. This describes RadioShack's situation perfectly. They struck agreements with mobile carriers, established kiosks in Target stores, rebranded as The Shack, and attempted numerous other initiatives during this period. None of these moves would reverse their trajectory. Each provided minor immediate benefits, but ultimately proved harmful long-term. If you need a pinpoint when things became truly dire, 2012 stands out. That's when they crossed into negative profitability. $72 million profit in 2011, then a $139 million loss in 2012, followed by a $400 million loss the following year. From that point forward, everything cascaded downward. Shortly after, they were delisted from the New York Stock Exchange due to their stock dropping below $1 and insufficient trading volume to meet listing requirements. Their workforce attempted legal action over 401k plans invested in RadioShack stock. The entire situation was chaotic. Here's another notable detail. I mentioned those losses starting in 2012. Negative profitability means insufficient revenue to sustain operations, requiring external funding, typically loans. They secured $250 million from Salas, but this loan came with a stipulation. RadioShack couldn't close more than 200 stores annually without Salas approval. When corporations lose money, the standard strategy involves identifying underperforming locations and shuttering them. It's logical to eliminate those stores and their associated losses disappear, theoretically improving overall profitability immediately. We observe this pattern constantly. RadioShack, anticipating the need to close stores, made a questionable decision, granting Salas this veto power. However, remembering their desperate position, they needed this capital to maintain operations. Without this loan, they might have collapsed entirely. Cornered, they accepted these terms. Fast forward. RadioShack is hemorrhaging money and desperately wants to close stores. Salas refuses, disagreeing with this strategy. RadioShack believes they're oversaturated with locations positioned too closely together, essentially cannibalizing their own customer base. Now we have RadioShack in severe distress, with Salas preventing even a dignified downsizing. If you had any uncertainty about RadioShack's struggles, this should clarify matters. Early 2015 brought bankruptcy declaration, finally enabling store closures. This company was essentially worthless. It traded at 9 cents per share on the OTC pink sheets. We all saw this coming. They immediately announced closing nearly 1,800 stores post-bankruptcy. Standard General purchased RadioShack, though their motivation remains unclear. As if this weren't sufficient, RadioShack filed for bankruptcy again earlier this year, closing 1,000 additional stores. Now only 70 locations remain operational. They may persist with a handful of stores, but they've effectively vanished from most of our lives. Where did everything go wrong? The internet. The internet damaged RadioShack more severely than most companies for several reasons. First, they arrived late. Nearly every retailer sells merchandise online now. Think of any retailer visiting their website, and they likely offer e-commerce. This has been standard for roughly 20 years, but RadioShack only embraced it about 10 years ago. They missed a decade of online revenue. And precisely when this became crucial and RadioShack ignored it is when their troubles commenced. Consider RadioShack's inventory: electronic components, resistors, cables, fuses, items easily ordered online without requiring in-person inspection before purchase. These products are ideally suited for e-commerce. Additionally, RadioShack stores are notoriously compact. If you need a particular component, what's the likelihood RadioShack stocks it? Uncertain. They're small, so they might not. But what's the probability the internet has it? Nearly certain. RadioShack is the type of establishment where you rush in, grab necessities, and exit. I recall once entering a RadioShack just to browse. I anticipated something resembling Best Buy, expecting to see current televisions, cameras, computers, DVDs, perhaps a gaming demo, all the engaging displays you encounter in electronics retailers. Instead, I found electronic components, some alarm clocks, a few mobile phones with fake displays, literally just printed images attached to them. Nothing interesting to examine. It's not that kind of establishment. I describe it as Diet Best Buy or low-calorie Best Buy. There's genuinely no advantage to shopping there. And aside from slightly faster acquisition, I don't understand why anyone would purchase there versus online. The internet seems like an ideal channel for most retailers, but especially for RadioShack. Yet they didn't pursue it. They allowed this opportunity to pass for years and suffered accordingly. Product selection. Let's visit RadioShack's website. An AM/FM stereo headset. But fortunately, there's a promotion bringing it down to just $48. Here are some Philips headphones, 30% off, reducing them to $140. Are people actually purchasing Philips headphones from RadioShack when they cost approximately the same as Beats? Think now about the price of this item. Remember, it's 30% off. The answer, $33. You might want to rush to their website for this deal. I'm simply examining the homepage that appeared when I accessed their site. Is it just me? Or is this a terrible product selection and overpriced? Are there sufficient people tinkering with radios and electronics to justify such emphasis on these items? I'm uncertain what RadioShack's target market is. That's the problem. For electronics components, I visit Best Buy's website and find computers, HD televisions, video games. People criticize Best Buy, but from my perspective, they're excellent compared to RadioShack. Cell phone obsession. In the 90s, they entered the cell phone business, and this was a terrible decision, though not initially. Mobile phones were exploding in popularity. It sounds odd saying entering the cell phone business in the 90s was misguided, but it was misguided in their execution. They only handled sales. In the 90s, acquiring cell phones was more difficult than today. Currently, you can't traverse a shopping mall without being approached about cell phone contracts. But then you need to know where to go. RadioShack was one place many people knew. Initially it worked well, so they committed fully and began neglecting the remainder of their business, perhaps explaining why that segment is so weak today. Their entire staff focused on selling these phones, and spending considerable time processing paperwork after sales. They disregarded customers seeking other products. After several years, all the service providers established their own stores: Verizon, Sprint, AT&T. Your provider likely sold directly, not through RadioShack. RadioShack sidelined the products they were originally known for to sell these phones, and now people acquired phones elsewhere. What became essentially half their business became obsolete. When we combine everything, we must ask ourselves, does RadioShack sell anything I wouldn't prefer buying elsewhere? For me, the answer is no. For electronic components, I'd choose Amazon. For cell phones, I'd go to the provider directly. Most of their remaining inventory doesn't interest me. Perhaps I'd buy batteries from them if the deal was attractive, but it's challenging to sustain a business on that foundation. How could they fail? What happened to all the money I spent on AAA batteries 9 years ago? As of today, RadioShack is essentially finished. They lasted nearly a century and might technically reach that 100-year milestone. A 20-year decline involving 2 bankruptcies, not to mention financial difficulties over 50 years ago, yet they're still standing. But for everyone watching this, they might as well be gone. Unless you're among the fortunate few near one of those 70 remaining locations. They've completely disappeared from your life. I can't claim any positive memories of the company. In fact, I only have that one disappointing visit. But that's probably because I'm not old enough to have experienced the company during its prime. That's why I initially overlooked this topic. My experience came well after this massive decline began. But if you had the chance to experience them during their better years, let me know what it was like. Or if you experienced them during their decline, especially toward the end, or even today, I'd appreciate hearing that too. I'd value your thoughts. Thank you for watching.